Yesterday we had a very serious and intense discussion about research and research through the practice, and also some broader and more abstract topics, but it was very academic. Today we would like to have more relaxed, more brainstorming discussion. And today we are gonna discuss about artificial intelligence, how it's already influencing us all, and what will be the future of architecture or society in general.
And right now, not right now, but since the beginning that this topic has been invented in the 20th century and continuing it, most important people are correlating with dystopian futures and the dangers that that we are going to all face, and how we are all going to be outdone by the machines and so on. But in the short term, the term is more bureaucratic, and it is referring to how artificial intelligence can be helpful to us and a tool, and how it is involved in stuff that we are already doing, and is going to give us the opportunity to do them in a different way. And in this is how we would like to start the discussion, as artificial intelligence as a potential tool or aid for our activities.
Yes, before we reach this predicted and avoidable apocalyptic doom in the future, we expect to have a certain friendly period where the AI will help our society. And if some of us are not up to date about the last hot news, I would like to mention some. On the 1st of September, Vladimir Putin gave a speech, and he said that who will invent artificial intelligence will become the ruler of the world. Then Elon Musk responded and tweeted back that competition between nations to get superiority in artificial intelligence will start Third World War. And also Chinese government officially announced that they have official plan to develop artificial intelligence by 2030 and gain total dominance, military and economically.
But for us, we wanted to pick your minds in how do you imagine that? Can you imagine that AI, first of all, could have a role in aiding us, like in our practice, in our research? What do we want from artificial intelligence? And first of all, how do we? What kinds of intelligence other than artificial, like our own intelligence, do we see in our work, and in which ways do we want machines to help us into that? In which way do we expect machines to be more intelligent than us, or in different ways?
Hello? It works. Well, I just since it's early morning. Good morning, first of all. My name is Maria. I'm coming from IAC, Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia. Just as a reply to your words, well, probably in this discussion, first of all, what we need to define what is intelligence and what is artificial. First of all, yeah, it's very, very blurry what is exactly artificial and what is exactly natural. And then when we are talking about the artificial intelligence machines, no, or like synthetic machines or something, probably now we are capable to create machines which will be giving the processes which are maybe better than happening in our brain. But I think the main problem that we are facing now is that we are not able yet to generate the data, accumulate the data, and to transmit this data to these machines. So basically, like, we are the machines which are able to, we have a culture, and we are accumulating a lot of the information in our heads, no? But so we are basically like accumulation of this data. And based on this data, we are creating certain decisions. And the decision is basically is our intelligence, no? How to transmit this data to the machine, I think this is the first problem that we are facing. And I believe that as soon as we will jump this problem, then it's going to be easier to teach the machine to give us the certain output. I will pass the microphone just to open up discussion in this morning discussion.
I think in order to tackle the question, we would also have to, say what we're looking at. Are we looking at how architects will be dealing with the consequences of artificial intelligence, or are we talking about how we could apply it, let's say, in the construction process or in the design process, or maybe everything? Because I think in first place, what all architects will have to consider are the consequences. If we think of autonomous driving, there's a lot of research actually going on in urban city planning, because it's quite amazing if you think about if all these parking lots are not necessary anymore because all these cars park somewhere and you just order them, then it will give us the city back, right? So I think there will be some direct implications that everybody as an architect will deal with. And then there is probably this application in research where I think is what you already were mentioning, where there are really many questions again to tackle and many problems, and it's really, I think it's not even at the doorsteps. I think it's still a horizon for us in architecture, because architects are always a bit behind when other already, but I think it's an emerging topic, and the Ars Electronica has it now had it as a general topic for the whole conference and the exhibition, and I think we will deal with it much more with swarm robotics in fabrication, all these things. But what our focus as architects, again, I probably should be, is how is the human interaction with artificial intelligence, and how do we humanize it, again, because I think if the promises of artificial intelligence are true, then we would potentially get completely new ways of collaborations, not only object-to-object collaboration, but also object-to-subject or subject-to-subject. And then I think we could probably come also to a new version of participation, something that architecture, seems to have forgotten a bit, or it was a topic. And I think if that would come back, so I think probably that could be a role also for architects to really think of, how do we make it human again? Just brainstorming.
Please hold the microphone closer to him.
Is it okay? I think the last 50, 60, 70 years we've been all being afraid of robots taking over our civilization and ultimately destroying it. None of those prophecies turn out real. We are still here. So I think there is some sort of a prejudice, against these. And I think the fear is to a mechanical kind of AI that we're sort of afraid. There was this nice exhibition in London last year about robots, and it showed that the diachronic relation of us to robots. I don't think it's moving there, but there is this level of AI that's going on in a really small scale in software that's really opening up possibilities for what we do, whether it's the studying of tissues and matter, or the chemical and biological observation, or the kind of arrangements that they do on a city level, you know, arranging networks. And this is a level of AI that, you know, it can be, you know, on our side. So there's nothing to be afraid. I'm trying to be optimistic. So to pass the mic on, there is this level of, you know, this robot fear that we shouldn't be afraid of, but instead we should embrace this kind of non-material AI that's been really revolutionizing the way we work, and we work on a city level, on architectural level, and on the level of research.
I would like to remind you a few statements. Maybe you know it. Some time ago, on Arch Daily, there was a prediction for our profession. What will happen in a few decades, and I was shocked that the plan is quite bad for us, because architecture we know, the field and profession we know, will have to disappear, because probably because of intelligence, artificial intelligence. Maybe it will take over this profession, I don't know. But still, I was shocked at that time, and it reminded me the Aaron Betsky's manifesto of his Biennale about experimentation. He stated that experiments will happen with the method and the form, and he didn't include the technology at that time, and it was, as I believe, in 2014. Well, it seems like technology overtakes our field and makes huge impact. But, and I'm trying to answer the question why my profession will have to disappear in 2 decades, for instance. It's probably because it focuses on the synthetic technological solutions, not on the creative intelligence. And I hope that artificial intelligence, if it will make impact on the creative intelligence in our profession, it has planned to survive. If it's not, if architecture stays in technological field, which is dominated right now, I believe, yes, it will disappear. But well, maybe it's a good plan. The problem is always the opportunity. We'll have to do something else, which we do always when we have a crisis. Well, the last crisis forced architects to do culture of architecture, especially in our country. Well, maybe that will be another movement towards somewhere else. But still, I would rather, I have hopes, but plan is bad.
Oh, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I want to take this back to ethics because I'm going to actually start with the story of neoliberalism. And my definition of artificial intelligence is when we delegate our thinking to computer programs, software, algorithms. There's a fantastic talk by Kevin Slavin on TED, actually, about the power of algorithms, particularly in financial markets, which are now commanding their own buildings because of the proximity to the data transfer between the algorithms that are predicting the financial markets and the stock exchange. So going back to the 1930s, when neoliberalism was first kind of invented as a way of getting around the imperfect decision-making made by politicians to do with economics. The whole idea was that we could have embodied markets, that there would be limits on these markets because of the physical transfer of goods and their manufacturing and productivity and workforces, and that actually the markets themselves could decide. And what it did was it took the human out of any decision making. And this disappeared around about the 1950s when our computers were simply not powerful enough to, let's say, fully engage with this proposition. Round about the 1950s, something else happens, which is the emergence of artificial life. And I would say that there's a very slippy distinction between artificial intelligence and artificial life because of our obsession of intelligence since about the Enlightenment, when we privilege the soul, the spirit, the mind above that of the material realm, the machine, the body. So I think that, you know, when we're talking about algorithms, really, artificial life, artificial intelligence are very similar things. But artificial intelligence is privileged in terms of values. So this is something to do with our values. This is something to do with what we are prepared to give up control over. And in the 1970s, then, when we had financial crises, both sides of the Atlantic, the neoliberal agenda started to come forth. And what we're seeing now is the result of machines making decisions about society on which, you know, we depend on an economic form of exchange. We're seeing greater disparities between the haves and have-nots. We have become uncoupled from the material realm so that there are no longer limits to these decisions, and this becomes problematic. So I absolutely think that, you know, that machines and tools and devices and programs and abacuses and Napier rods, they've all helped us make decisions. And I think that what we just need to be very careful about is what we are delegating control to or decision-making to, and that we do not lose touch with those things that, you know, kind of matter to us deeply in humanity that cannot be calculated. Empathy, let's say, for example, the story about AI and iRobot, you know, Will Smith in the movie, you know, the grown man and the little child in the car, you know, there's a collision, the child in the car is sinking, and the man gets rescued because statistically he has a greater chance of survival, and the machine decides to save him, and he spends the rest of his life not being able to forgive that incident. So I think that's really what's at stake.
Yeah, I can maybe, in a way, come back to very, very simple things. That there was a story that at a job interview, one had to say what kind of languages he or she knew. And that was not really about French, English, and Italian, but about scripting languages. And I think it is something we need to, I think that's something we have succeeded quite well already, but not, it's not an overall situation. And it's a part of the architecture education that we need to provide people with skills to operate machinery, that scripting, programming is something which is one of the basic tools for the future architect to actually be able to engage in whatever, and predicting where it will lead is often going completely the wrong direction. But at least people have the tools to engage with, and I think this is, I mean, I think it's a big question for educators and architecture schools. I mean, the world has become much more complex, and there are so many things which could, and in a way, should be taught to students, and that does not really fit in the 5-year program. So it's a good question of what kind of things we teach them. And I think the sort of very basic scripting has actually become one of the sort of unavoidable things in the architecture education.
I was talking to geographists a couple of days ago, and he was saying that it's actually a new cultural technique. And then I was looking at other curriculums at our university, and everyone had programming and scripting as a basic skill, and only we don't have it as architects. And I also was irritated about it because, of course, students do it, right? They teach it. And then this theoretist or technical philosopher Vera Bühlmann, who just lately I was in a panel with, and she was talking about literacy. So she was saying that we have the responsibility to give students a literacy in these things, because it's not even the scripting tools or not even artificial intelligence. It starts with Facebook and Google, that people don't realize that they're caught up in these digital bubbles of actually things that are really very directly influencing what they think and what they see and what they research, because the algorithms are already controlling us, and it's about the awareness, but also about the literacy, that you know what's going on. And yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I would like to continue on this thought. There is this one book from Netherlands. I think the author was Martin de Waal, and it's called City as an Interface. And it is talking about, again, this concept of, it's called sentient city, or then city as interface, or augmented city. There are many names, but basically programming starting to influence how we experience spaces, and if we reach those spaces at all. So I think we are reaching an era where first of all, through social media, Google and Facebook, and then later on through EI, some places disappear from our view. So we stop even seeing them in our kind of information feed. And then other places become very relevant because they are constantly in our feed. So the city as an interface book is essentially asking that, can we then somehow, do we have to start programming the city experience? So we're not designing the physical city, but we're also designing the kind of, programming the city experience in such a way. And then the question of control, that are then in the end some people excluded from certain places, that if the algorithm finds that they are unsuitable to even access certain areas, then it can reach these kind of outcomes in the end where we're not even allowed to see certain areas on our map in the end. And this is an urban planning question, of course, so it's a wider question, but I think this is something we should teach and discuss with our students as well, that they are very aware of how what they see in Facebook and Google is actually influencing their own decisions about what they want to do, where they want to go in very different cities and different places.
I think it's somehow a sign that the middle chair is empty, actually, that and the microphone is awaiting somebody. I was just a couple of weeks ago discussing with a physician from Tartu University about the artificial intelligence, and he promised that soon will be this kind of momentum when this artificial intelligence is something as we are. The artificial intelligence idea is that to put something to simulate us, and he talked about that already now we put some kind of information to the black box. That's one scenario, how to translate the artificial intelligence. We don't know what's happening already now inside the box and what is the result. So we are quite close to us. And continuing about the languages and learning languages, I think it's quite important to start to learn, because sooner or later there will be somebody who will discuss with us, making mistakes and provoking the same questions about the ethics, about economics and other things. So I think universities have to recognize that we are already on the position where we are equal with the artificial intelligence. We have to learn the languages. So I would like to just continue with Toomas' remarks, that it's quite important, that it's not just the machinery or something which is separately, existing, but it's part of our lifetime already. The question about what university could do, learn the languages or study the languages.
Just to continue your comments, I would maybe be a bit critical to this point yet, and also in reply, I don't know your name, sorry, Toomas. So also to reply you if the machines are replacing our jobs or not, I think not yet. I think we're not there yet. There's two different, I think, points. One is like two different type of the machines and the intelligence, you know. That one is automata and another one is autonomous. So we are still in automata. So automata is the machines which are probably acting outside of the system where they are actually acting, no? So they are deterministic. And what are they creating? They're creating the patterns, no? And who is making the decisions is us. Who is programming the language is us. And basically to jump into autonomous system when the machine is actually making decisions, which has artificial intelligence, which is inside of the system where it's functioning, I think we are not there yet. And no one is taking our jobs, at least yet. And how to face this reality, this is a good question. And I don't know when it's going to happen. And that's why I'm very interested in the topic of this Biennale, no? Because what we are facing is the real machines, autonomous machines. And we are trying to mix these ecologies, these organisms with architecture in order to bring intelligence as well. And for me, I really find it fascinating from this point of view. That's like everything what we are discussing these days here in Tallinn. But again, I don't think we are there yet. No one is taking our place yet.
Can I'll just make a brief comment and then pass it on here. And that is that machines have always taken our jobs. That's why we invented them. I mean, we invented the tractor so we wouldn't have to do manual work. I mean, so I think it's actually a progressive thing that, you know, society decides, you know, on these values, what we want to delegate, what we want to control, or what we want to engage in. And I think we definitely should kind of learn these languages. I think it's really important because, as you say, I mean, it's absolutely part of the fabric of the kind of the advanced kind of Western societies. And I think that there is still, you know, a big gap between advanced Western societies and, you know, people that are in the developing world. But the question is, if we're learning this, what are we doing with these? You know, it really is the ethical and kind of value-based systems that we're operating in, and I think that's what we need to really stay present with. I mean, you know, so that making fantastic stuff like this, you know, using a technological solution, absolutely. But when we start making decisions about social space and whether or not we should have it or not, Patrick Schumacher, you know, I think we need to be very, very careful about exactly what we're delegating control to.
Just a short mark that it's already happening that machines or kind of artificial intelligence making his own decisions and creating and inventing. It was a couple of months ago, Facebook was testing their artificial intelligence, like putting two artificial intelligence to communicate and speak with each other. And I don't know how long it took, but these two artificial intelligence, they invented their own language. And the researchers and scientists couldn't understand it.
I'd like to jump in there because first of all, I think that Rachel nails it by identifying the ethical as being the heart of this sort of discussion. I think that's very important to emphasize. Secondly, I think we have been treating whole swathes of the population as if they're sort of artificially intelligent machines. And now we're simply reifying that into forms of technology rather than underpaid workers. Thirdly, I think that no task itself is neutral, so when we sort of technologize a given task into a robot, we are encoding it with all sorts of values, including ethical values. There's no way of doing a task which is non-neutral. You know, a task will be done differently according to gender, culture, sexuality, etc., etc. So, you know, there's no sort of neutral translation of human action and activity into machine form. And I think as part of that, I sort of come back to this language question that you raised about machines talking to each other, or the proposal that we learn the language of the robots. And I find that sort of quite curious in a world where basically the populations that hold the power have not bothered to learn other languages to begin with. And yet now we should learn the language of robots, which presumably we programmed in the first place, but now they've become so autonomous that we enslave ourselves by trying to understand their languages. And probably they'll be smarter to stay always one step ahead. So whenever we learn, you know, oh, you are speaking this way, master, they have probably moved on to another form and to outwit us. And there's a very nice aphorism by Gregory Bateson, which I'm fond of quoting, which is, "You are not speaking from where I am listening. You are not speaking from where I am listening." And I think what's nice about that is it denotes a protocol that's not working. You know, that the speaker and the addressee are not actually linking. You know, the system has crashed in some way. And I think that will be a sort of central consideration in this sort of debate, because if we fast forward and we say artificial intelligence increasingly takes over the activities of architecture, starts doing the more mundane, low-level stuff, but it gets smarter and smarter, it does more and more stuff, and then we come to an event like this and we're actually watching robots doing the showmanship, not people, you know. Are we then seduced by a purely formal presentation, by a robot showing these incredibly complex PowerPoint slides? God forbid we're still in that world, but you know, let's say we are, because the robot knows how to you know, appeal to us. Are we seduced by that, or are we saying, you know, there's something lacking here, and what's lacking is the realm of experience, which is deeply connected to the human body with all its fragility and complexities and, you know, nuances and so on? Or will we simply say, it's fine because the images are cooler, the combinations are cooler, the technology is really cool, we could never have thought of that as humans, in which case some people would argue we've entered into a world which is essentially fascistic, because it's a world of pure spectacle in which there is no history and there is no embodiment or cultural variety or difference, or for that matter conflict. You know, we've entered purely into that realm of surface spectacle, and so that's why I think, you know, the ethics is really core to this whole discussion.
I always in these discussions have this sentence by Michel Serres in my head saying that if technology frees your hands, you can do something else with it. And he was, of course, thinking he was believing in the poetic person. So you know, it's the ethical question, but also the question who's in control of technology. And technology is always a tool to exclude people or to include. And I think architecture, we are a discipline of inclusion, or at least we should be, if we think of the public space. And already our public space has started to become a space of exclusion, because there are no phone cells anymore. So if you don't have a smartphone, and there's a whole generation of people, let's say over 70, that have not had an academic education probably, that are not using those devices. So we already exclude people. And I think, you know, and that's a general debate, a societal debate and political debate we also have to have. It's not the technology itself we should be afraid of, but in whose hand it is, and that was also what Putin was saying, no? Because most of it's all developed for military use still, and that's also why there is so much money brought into this. And I think this is really a much broader debate, but I think the technology itself, I would also like to you know, see the potential that's in it, in terms also of inclusion. Yeah.
Sorry, if I wasn't proposing that. I wasn't taking an anti-technology point of view. I think with, you know, with all these questions, including globalization, it's both and. You know, it's.
Yeah, but you know, today I think it's also, I think, the problem of people who are developing these things, that they are too positivistic and they have commercial interests. You know, and they're because someone with common sense could say, well, what's the problem in replacing Donald Trump with artificial intelligence, right? So probably that's better for all of us. But I think the problem behind that is that we seem to believe in predictability. And if we look at hurricanes and all these things we were discussing yesterday, we have no idea how the world develops. But I think all this idea is still believe on this idea we can calculate the world. And this is what frightens me, this very, idea that this is possible at all, no?
I really think this exclusion problem is there, and there is this ethical issue that Rachel was talking about as well. This all sounds like a first world problem discussion. I mean, I was wondering if you can do the same discussion in some country in Africa that have more existential problems, like find water and food, but that's okay, that's quite a cliche. Even though it's it's a big issue, it's true. I'm really curious about what will happen when certain AIs will collaborate. I mean, we all know that Facebook is somehow watching our lives, and a couple of hours ago it started suggesting me some friends from when I was a student, just because I met some other people. So we all know how it works, and we also know that cars soon will be, will be not needing us to drive themselves to and from, your home, your office. So I was wondering if these two combine, if your car is gonna let you go get away from the office and then just go to the countryside, if we're gonna be allowed to do it, and then, or just like drop something that we have to do and do something else. So this kind of AI combination, in a further level of networking, I don't know what kind of social implications it might have, in our lives, and the way we design cities, and the way we might feel, the need to protect ourselves from that, or try to get exclusion ourselves, from that. It's such a big issue, and
the conversation is already going there somehow, but between ethics and predictability and how the future could be, and even regulations or how and such things. I wanted to ask. I remember Elon Musk saying something. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was somewhere in the meaning that. All of these things, these futures and progress or utopias or dystopias are not going to happen by themselves just because automatically the world is going somewhere that the movies are showing, but we have to actively do things in this direction. And in all other fields, because of other urgencies, money or war or whatever, people are actively pursuing going into this field. So our question would be, what can we do as architects, as designers, or hopefully as slightly more humanitarian technocrats to create, to either, are we going to design artificial intelligence, or are we going to create some hierarchy of values and ethics to regulate? So what could be our specific place in this future?
Well, I mean, one way of paraphrasing that question would be to say, are you as architects designing artifacts or forms of life?
I do like the idea of generating the discursive prototypes through which we can articulate, let's say, meaningful relationships that, do embody a desired ethics that kind of relates to people and communities. I think, that I agree, that the idea of algorithms performing work it's a good idea. It's something that can be well produce, but I think that really the architecture in the 21st century, given the kinds of political, social problems that we've got, I think that the political aspect of architecture, you know, the care of the polis, the, you know, the spaces that are inhabited, really is something that, you know, I think artificial intelligence or not, really should be at the heart of our agenda, because there are some huge challenges that I do not trust politicians alone or big corporations alone to sort out. There needs to be a counterforce that is really invested in people, their welfare, a fair society, all those kinds of things. And I think that, you know, as architects, use whatever technology is available. I think that, you know, these artificial intelligences are amazing, you know, if applied towards things that, you know, enhance well-being and kind of equality amongst us. So I would say prototyping and kind of starting the conversations that really re-engage us all with a sense of a fairer world.
It's okay. I'll be from here. I think this is a very kind of interesting topic that you are discussing here, and it's great to bring this idea of artificial intelligence within the architectural design realm. I have some thoughts and I have some kind of questions that I'm still struggling to answer to myself. First of all, when we're talking about AI or artificial intelligence, what this entails, what are the actual algorithms? What is an artificial neural network? What is a genetic algorithm? What's machine learning or vector quantization? I think we need to understand the techniques behind this technology in order to address this kind of issues. But there is another kind of humanitarian, or if you like, non-humanitarian aspect in the AI. And I think artificial intelligence is becoming almost an obsolete term. I would call it non-human intelligence. And nowadays we see intelligence throughout the material realm, the biological realm, the technological realm. And this is something interesting because for the first time, the exceptionalism of human, or what we have constructed as human, is being questioned. And I think this opens up possibilities precisely to rethink and not to impose politics and ethics, or if you like, politics and moralism. Because an ethical realm is different from the moral code that drives the society. And I completely agree with Professor Armstrong that it's precisely this neoliberal moralism that kind of controls technology and imposes technology. But I would see this kind of aspect of non-human intelligence as this opening up precisely this kind of new field through which we understand that we are bathed within other intelligent beings. And if this is not a computer, it is an animal, it is a material substrate, is something that can actually take the decisions on its own. We don't take decisions, we are the product of many decisions, imperceptible decisions, that have been made in a very kind of intelligent way. And I think we should actually harvest that, we should actually exploit that in order to rethink politics, rethink conflict, precisely, rethink conflict in political and ethical terms. Thank you.
Can I respond to that? I think that's a fantastic question, because I do think that we're incredibly anthropocentric about the idea of intelligence. You know, we're still very much attached to the Judeo-Christian model of, you know, humanity being at the top of some kind of biological pyramid, and we do that very unconsciously. And I think that it's a really interesting time when we're looking at personhood for chimpanzees and dolphins, and even in New Zealand, where actual rivers, you know, are bestowed with, let's say, personhood because of the Maori beliefs. I think going on from that really is that artificial intelligence is embodying a philosophy of disembodied intelligence. So it's the Cartesian split. The mind and the body are not coupled. And when we look at the slime mold, let's say, for example, that Claudia showed yesterday, the polycephalum city, that is a deeply embodied intelligence. And this coupling between matter and some kind of sensitivity. We're starting to see that that the intelligence of an ant is fit for purpose for the life of an ant. That doesn't make it more or less intelligent, because if we tried to live the life of an ant, we'd really come a cropper. So there are probably many types of intelligence, and by calling it artificial intelligence, we are kind of calling out a monotheism about the idea of intellect. If we look at what we've done with IQ tests, we know that those are culturally extremely biased and extremely suspect when we test people, from different parts of the world, different languages, different backgrounds. So I think this is a really important thing that I think that what we see is this Turing test kind of applied informally to this. Do we think, given all our cultural biases and educational background and preferences, do we think this is intelligent? I'd be very interested to see what the Maori think about, the use of algorithms in this way. Would they consider such a robot to be intelligent? Why didn't you come up?
It's okay. Just like to follow up this. It's okay. Just like to follow up on this kind of dualism between the embodied and the intellect and the abstract. And now we have we have a bifurcation. Either we go to the eliminative materialism, that there is nothing else apart from material interaction, or we start thinking more in quantum physics or dynamic systems theory, where kind of singularities or this kind of other kind of phases of materiality use this, actually have this kind of mental pole, as Whitehead would actually say, that all entities, all actual occasions have a material pole, but have a mental pole. And this kind of the mental pole is the one that gives the decision, that is not only the interaction of the material, right, or the relations of the materiality, but precisely this kind of almost intellect, or this kind of abstract, disembodied entity, which for Whitehead is eternal object, for Gilles Deleuze is a dark precursor, or for quantum mechanics is something else. So this kind of, this is not a dualism that kind of supports the Platonic or the Descartesian one, but it is an immanent one, sorry.
Can I respond to just one more time? This really feels like we should be sitting next to each other on chairs. I love what you're saying, and I think one of the things I'm just going to bring up is a conversation that I had on a bus with a fantastic female mathematician called Françoise Chatelain. And she was talking to me about number theory, and how important it is that, or how significant it is that we are now in a digital age where 0 and 1 do everything. And they weren't invented till around, the turn of the 16th century. But they changed the world. The idea of 0 before then, the idea of nothingness was ridiculous. And the idea of infinity was God. There were certainly forms of belief that said that really shouldn't be invented. So that was 0 and infinity. Yes, I didn't say 1, did I? I meant infinity. But essentially what she said, okay, so with the digital, we were, so someone like Turing was thinking in the terms that even he admitted weren't, kind of abstractions, approximations for what he was really interested in, which was natural computing. And so, it allowed a mechanistic solution and something that you could actually start to work with. But now that it's been incorporated into the kind of invisible landscape of society, what she's saying is that we're losing our relationship with numbers. And she says that it gives us a very particular kind of computing that is a deterministic form of computing. If a computer doesn't know something, it crashes. It can't deal with infinity. And so she's working with irrational numbers that are indivisible by another number. And she says that this is actually more in keeping, that sounded really creepy. The machines are after me. But she says that, using so she does something called qualitative computing. So that there are forms of unconventional computing that people are now using that actually, let's say, challenge number theory. They challenge, the systems that are being used to compute. And that's not to say that digital computing is useless and it's bad and we shouldn't be doing it. It is to increase the portfolio for our understanding and survival in the world, to increase our capacity to make these decisions about ethics, which maybe we can't do with one set of tools. Maybe we can get closer to it using another.
Maybe we can also bring all this context back to education, not only us as practitioners, but as people who are teaching architects, or how we would was one other matter besides ethics, which is probably quite a difficult task to put inside the schedule of an architecture school, but the other subject that was stressed before by many people was literacy. And first of all, yes, we do need to know to an extent how these bodies work, but what other things do we need to be fluent in that we are not right now? What kind of distinctions? What is our role? What is the machine's role from now on? If that is, so assuming that this is not defined and the machines are not going to take over without asking us and do everything that they want in any case. But as long as we still have this luxury, what do we dream that the machines are going to take over? What is going to be the next, how do you call these machines that are carving the earth to throw the seeds in?
If you stop thinking about us and them, we the embodied flesh and blood people, and them the robots with the artificial intelligence that we put life into, as it were, and think more in terms of the sort of forms of life that we're building, then we start talking instead of objects, we talk about interfaces. So what interfaces are we creating? And one analogy to that is indeed the question of literacy. So what forms of literacy? Is it the literacy of a sort of colonialist language imposition, whereby, like in Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest, goes to an island, he finds the wild, untamed nature and imposes a language on it. And Caliban ends up saying, "You have taught me your language, and my profit on it is I know how to curse you with it." So that's one form of machine encoding, it seems, where you say, "You will think like us, you will imitate us until we are satisfied." And at a certain point, the robot turns around and says, "Well, actually, we're talking to ourselves now, and you're outside that loop." The other form of literacy or type of ethical interface is to do with a philosophy of dialogue, whereby there is difference, but there is a sort of a will to accommodate difference within acts of communication, and out of the meeting between difference, a third space emerges, which is the hermeneutic space, the space of interpretation. And I would say that's a deeply creative space, but it depends upon a relationship of power, which is to do with equality between the two sides, not domination, which is the colonialist imposition of a language on the subject, but rather the acknowledgement of difference and the working through of difficulty that goes with that. And as the point's been raised in a very nice way, that I love this idea of creating another sort of species, as it were, which then confronts us with the conventions and the habits and the limitations of our own embodied humanness, and forces us to think just like it would if we encountered alien life, or and perhaps alien life under our oceans, maybe lurking there, but forces us to think no longer as us being, as Rachel said, the center of the universe, but rather being one element in a much more complex ecosystem of related matter, some of which is living and some of which is semi-living and some of which we could conventionally say is not living in our conventional classification system.
I just come back to all your questions that you're also facing before and also continue on the talk. Is the question that you were asking before, how do we actually face this as an architect or designers, is very interesting now, because we are talking about the topic in a quite an abstract way, but how does it actually change our role, or how does it actually change the way we design, how does it change the way we use the space? Now, I think this is a challenging question, and how do we teach is also an interesting question. Does this artificial intelligence is coming actually to teach? I think it's becoming a...
Yeah, also wanted to ask a question, this provocative, that we already know that machine learning, we can predict that in the future artificial intelligence can do research and teach us. So do we need, for example, professors in the future, or even traditional universities? And do we want that machines going to teach us?
I think, again, this is a very, let's say, limited discussion. If we look at the field of architecture and the field of education, maybe we could say, well, it's these bio schools here in the tunnel that are dealing with this. But even at that schools, I don't know what your experiences are, but I feel a lot of resistance also from students to dive into these topics. And I think it's exactly because of what Rachel Armstrong was saying, that this is such a fundamental question, like what is the individuum, what is creativity, and we're very much, especially as architects, we still believe in this creative mind that is receptive of something, that finds the essence, that then materializes it, but it all goes through us. And I often experience when we are teaching our courses that when we tell students, you're here to observe first. So you're just observing, and then you're trying to cultivate, and then looking at your things, and then you're trying to evaluate also, because you have to do it, and then the result will emerge. Then they look at me like, I rather want to do hand drawing, because I think that's really expressive. So it really also questions the idea of expression of so many things. Also, if our whole system of expression is based on human interaction, right? So it's exactly what we say about language, because also design is a language, and what happens to this kind of communication. So I think it's really, there's such fundamental questions in how we design that. And there's a special thing in architecture, which is also great, that we always have this resistance within the discipline also, because we're not just a scientific discipline or a technological driven, we're also a cultural and traditionally and historically influenced discipline. So I think we are a discourse, and this is a great thing. And so, yeah, I think sometimes, I also sometimes think, well, probably have to listen to my students to say, but you know what? I want to take something in my hand and build something with my hand. It's really about, it's a difficult question. Marcus Cruz yesterday said, we will probably have different types of school and different kinds of education. I don't know. Probably we also need both. We need also the analog and the handmade, and yeah.
I just want to follow that up. I think that's a really great question and response. And I guess what I would say for architectural schools now is, what is ecological thinking? Because we're making a transition from an industrial era where we're making products, they're buildings, towards actually designing much more inclusively, or we need to, the theme of the this event, the Biennale, is how do we actually be more inclusive about the way that we think of designing with the non-human. Whether those are birds, on the peninsula, or whether that is a sewage plant, which is metabolizing the waste from the city. So what? And I think it was it Marcus yesterday who mentioned the ecological thought. by Timothy Morton. So the idea of Morton kind of deconstructs nature. And he asks for, as was said yesterday, a new aesthetics. I think it has to go beyond aesthetics. It has to go to an ecological ethics from which new aesthetics will emerge. So what are those relationships? What are the processes that allow us to do that? We don't have those answers. And I think that that's why, for me, I'm enjoying being in experimental architecture. But I think that all practices, all schools, in some ways, will be experimenting with these new tools, technologies, challenges, things that we don't know. And I think that this is very much an age of the unknown in architecture. And if we had to prepare students for anything, it is how do we face the unknown with an ethical framework, and then kind of start making the first incursions into that. Develop prototypes rather than final solutions. I think that's happening at this symposium, and I think it's real. I think it's present, and I think that we're all part of this. But I think that it's really nice to, let's say, call it out and start to create the words that help us join up some of these dots.
Yeah, just to continue from that, I think that's really very important. That part of education, and also part of any kind of experimental practice or ambitious practice, is critical thinking, which means actually challenging anything we're dealing with, and that is, for technology in a very broad sense, it is not really trying to apply technologies for something we have prescribed or we have thought of that we need to achieve, but actually challenging technology, seeing what we can do else, what else can we do with it than what it has been prescribed for. And I think this is a very important part of the architecture schools and also the more innovative practices, to challenge technology. And that is not a linear path. This is leading somewhere more often that we don't know where. And this is where something new will emerge.
I just believe that as a professors, we are making just better mistakes that could inspire machines.
I was quite relieved to listen to hear someone talking about critical thinking and resistance, because it's the way architects work, and that's the challenge when we educate students. Architecture cannot be made, designed through zeros and ones. I was quite intrigued by this alternative number theory, because I don't think it's anyone can work through a yes or no. Otherwise, we would end up with decisions like Will Smith's wrong decision. And that's all what architecture is about, and that's what this resistance from audiences, from various level of decision making that you were talking about. So it's really, really a weird question of how to educate students, and because there's no recipe, and then the way you educate them is not irrelevant to the general zeitgeist, political zeitgeist, ethical zeitgeist. So it would be rephrased like how to educate it today, and it would be a different answer of how to educate architects 50 years ago or 50 years in the future. And yeah, I don't have the answer of what's an AI has to do with the education thing, since it's not a 0-1 correlation, but a much more critical, much more complex, thing to do.
Questions out in the audience?
I would like to pick up from a design methodology which is almost like common among the experimental architects, which is actually the emergent outcome. We observe, we experiment, and it's emergent outcome. And I would like, just to follow up from the previous discussion, to quote Steven Saviro, which recently said, we should abandon the aesthetics of emergence, and we should think about the ethics of decision. And the ethics of decision, not of the human decision, but precisely of the decisions of the experimental apparatuses that it makes on its own. And I think that kind of brings critical theory as low critical theory, not again from the human kind of perspective, but actually start kind of see the relevance of this kind of emergent outcome, not in an aesthetical form, but more in kind of ethical and political decision making through the process. Because it's very kind of common that students are very kind of enthusiastically embrace the outcome, the fuzziness, the coolness of the result, of the morphological result, but they don't take account what is the relevance, what is the ethical or ecological thinking behind these kind of processes that take decisions of their own and therefore direct an outcome and create the environment through which the whole kind of social political field can change, can have the chance and the affordances to change. So abandon the aesthetics of emergence, embrace the ethics of decision.
Yeah, I would just kind of like to raise perhaps another question that in different universities and also in some pedagogical courses, there has been different kind of discussions about not what we can do with technology and AI in schools, but rather what we should teach in a completely analog way. Let's say, what kind of capabilities should students have which don't require any technology and rather are just kind of human experience or different kind of experiences. So of course in architecture there's a lot of these kind of courses which would kind of support critical thinking, but then also a lot of courses which are to do with drawing, painting, physically building different kind of things. But then there are also other ideas there to teach students to, I don't know, have experiences in the camping in the woods or meditate or any kind of basically life experiences which they do in schools but don't even allow the use of any technology to be present. So I just started kind of thinking that if we are discussing what we can teach together with technology or to understand better technology to create these interfaces, so what should be kept in this very analog manner?
Can I just, because I just had a discussion with somebody who, this comes from design build studios, right? The idea that the first thing they do, they go into the wood and they build a hut with their own hands. And sometimes I feel I totally want to oppose this in a way, because I think the ethical discussion, the discussion about values, we have to do on a societal base. I think it needs everyone. It needs just our discipline as architects. It's really political debate. With a student, I really don't want to tell a student what ethic opinion he should have. I really believe in that this has to evolve out of his education, his background, because it's like a bit like having Rem Koolhaas as a student and telling him you must not be cynical because, you have to be, I think I'm so, this is something that, I don't want to go with them into the woods and learn them that they need each other to survive. They should do this with their friends and their parents. I want to learn them skills. I want to give them readings. I want to expose them to the discourse, expose them to many, many opinions. And then I have to trust that they're intelligent and aware enough, and I might give them hints. But I'm a bit, this kind of psychological methods, I'm a bit, I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned.
Well, I guess with critical thinking, you don't tell people how to think or what their ethics should be, but rather you ask them questions about the implications of their assumptions in their work. So if somebody's chosen to be cynical, then what are the consequences of that, and what world relationships do you start devising out of that? But I think that a lot of architectural education, like art and design education more generally, is still based upon the notion of a sort of 19th century notion of originality, of the signature, of the individual, of selfhood, authorship, that, I marshal my genius, I practice my practice, and eventually I put my signature to a work and I'll have a job. At a time when, a lot of designers from Asia and elsewhere are coming online, being able to do that type of work much more effectively and efficiently. that may be outdated, that way of teaching people. And I recently have been learning a lot from choreographers, for example, who talk not in terms of the evaluation of the outcome, but rather the process. They say you shouldn't come to evaluate the final performance. The actual work is in the devising, in the collaboration, in the forms of life that we create, and the work is simply an expression of that. And particularly in my case, I've been working a lot lately with contemporary circus artists. And there I've been so struck by the form of community that's created, partly because they depend on each other for often life and death decisions, not wishing to dramatize it, but there you could say that actually what the audience sees, the spectacle with all the virtuosity or anti-virtuosity that's sort of encoded into it, is simply a tool, but it's a tool towards an end. And what is that end? Well, the end may be the set of trust and collaboration and new forms of cooperation that emerge through their way of practice. So if one shifts the focus in architectural education from the object or the signature or the self-expression into a more collaborative way of working, which is to do with the complexities and difficulties of confronting difference in collaborative forms, then it may be that that what architecture is ultimately producing are proposals for different forms of life, and the actual what we would call architecture itself is simply an exemplar of a much larger question, which means that you can then connect architecture to other forms of practice which are also engaged in that sort of worlding, which I think is particularly in this day and age where worlding of a very narrow sort is being imposed on us from above. I think, like Arian Apadurai, that you can think about globalization from above or from below, and the version from below has potential to be a more emancipatory version, I think, a more empowering version.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I also wanted to say kind of encouraging words to the field of architecture, because I'm not an architect. My background is computers and artificial intelligence and artificial life, and interestingly, the yeah, the most interesting discussions basically for me that are happening in Tallinn are most of the time happening in the Department of Architecture of the Academy of Arts. And I think architecture, it has a lot of the components that are necessary to understand and deal with the kind of systems like artificial intelligence, because architecture is in some ways it creates artifacts, it deals with very large complex systems with a societal kind of effects. It deals with systems that are not fully controllable. You have all the different stakeholders. It's the same in the artificial intelligence. You are creating so complex systems that you don't really control every part, every single thing anymore, but you still have to somehow orchestrate the things, understand the emergent properties of the stuff. And yeah, I think architecture in some ways is a lot more up to dealing with that kind of issues compared to many other fields. One thing that might be missing is this literacy that you were talking about, to kind of understand how these artificial intelligence systems really work, because in humanities there is a lot of naivety or fundamental misunderstandings of what is going on. And all these popular press articles about I don't know, artificial intelligence inventing their own language and then being switched off by evil computer scientists, these are kind of, in some ways, quite naive and misunderstanding of what is really happening. And I think it is necessary to somehow teach the students how these systems really work.
I just also would like to connect your comment to the idea of the aesthetic of emergence would you think we should abandon? And I think that's so great about the event here and about the exhibition, that is exactly about not abandoning that, because I think that was also what yesterday the discussion was about, that we also need to deal with the aesthetics, meaning the perception of it, because that's what's so aesthesis means not, how it looks, but how it feels, how we experience it, and that's exactly our, now again, human perspective. But I think because architecture is a great communicator, right? It synthesizes things, and it also makes things graspable that are not, and not everybody will gain literacy. I will probably never gain literacy because it's too much work, and I do so many other things as a designer that I can't sit at home and program all the time. So how are the tools to make things, to communicate things, and to also reflect things that are happening? And architecture does that, and also of course through aesthetics. And I think that's why we should not we should exactly deal with it. But yeah.
It seems like the subject is... go for it.
Sorry, I was interrupting you. No, I was coming back to my thoughts and listening everyone. I was, maybe I'm being a bit critical, but again, coming to, for example, the city, no? Or in architecture, for me, architecture probably is the set of the relations. What we're trying to do is to set up the interaction and relation of us, of the humans, and the public space, or and the space. So probably when we are talking about the artificial intelligence, we need to include this intelligence in this interaction system. And I critique my own thought, because basically when we are starting to talk about artificial intelligence, we are starting to think how to embed the technology inside of the urban fabric, which is not the... let me talk with myself. So basically, it's not only... I'm talking with myself. With myself. Give me a second.
Just some thoughts, maybe. I mean, I really enjoy that it's, within your discussions, it has kind of been revealed that it's about openness and criticality at the same time, because, one could think that, perhaps, 5,000 years ago, a wheel was invented. We're still discussing the results, whether it's kind of human-driven or rolls by itself. And so, as for the, learning by machine intelligence, it's already here. People learn not just computer languages by computers, but, with phone apps, they learn Japanese or something. And, kids or grown-ups learn from computer games by watching them. So these things kind of need to be discussed, and being kind of critical about them, but also being open and kind of really have the courage to kind of tackle them and experiment with them. Just some thoughts.
The debate seems to be opening up more, but unfortunately, because of the schedule, we have to continue it off stage probably. But thank you very much for... was there something else? Not for much, yeah. Thank you very much for posing much more questions, because we were aware of the naivety of the basic questions, and we were not expecting answers, but it was very, very nice for us to see how these questions were contextualized for our profession and for our age and so on. And so thank you all very, very much. And also separately, everybody who jumped in and made it even more open. Thank you.